One of the darkest things about Ottoman Empire history is Devshirme. What is Devshirme? Devshirme was blood tax. Christian boys were taken by Ottomans. They were trained to become soldiers and state clerks. Grand Viziers were such children. Grand Viziers were like prime ministers today. Why was Devshirme invented? Ottoman Empire did not want families to become powerful. Positions in the government could not pass from father to a son. This was achieved through Devshirme. Children of Devshirme recruits were seen as Muslims and ineligible for positions. Only Christian converts could do certain jobs. Turkish historians want to believe that ambitious and poor Christian families gave their sons voluntarily. Sadly, there are very few historical sources about nature of Devshirme. Turkish historians make it look like it was great opportunity. How many children were taken and how often? We have no idea. The number could be high. Blood tax wasn't collected every year. We think blood tax was collected every 4 or 5 years. Children were taken from different parts of Ottoman Empire. Some parts were spared for 20 or 30 years before Devshirme was collected again. Ottoman Empire was in constant need of soldiers. They also needed state clerks because people were often executed. Christian boys were sometimes castrated to become eunuchs. Castration in medieval times leads to death in most cases. When was Devshirme established and when was it abolished? There are no certain dates. Devshirme was first mentioned in 1438. This means it was already established by then. Devshirme existed for about 200 years. Christians could do nothing against Devshirme. Devshirme was abolished thanks to ambitious Muslim families. Muslims wanted their sons to become Grand Viziers. In 1594, Muslims were allowed to take positions previously taken by Christian converts. Devshirme was fading away slowly. Many believe Devshirme was abolished in 1648. But some sources mention blood tax after 1648. In 1703, Ottoman lawmakers wanted to reintroduce Devshirme. Muslims were strongly against this. This means that Devshirme was certainly abolished before 1703. One wouldn't have to reintroduce Devshirme if it still existed. How were boys selected? They were between 8 and 20 years old. They had to be healthy and couldn't be an only son or orphan. Why not take orphans? Some believe Devshirme was invented to hurt Christian families. Parents had to suffer. Taking orphans would be too easy. Most of taken boys became part of Janissaries, special troops. Janissaries were sent against Christian rebels. This means that brothers killed brothers while Turks watched. Boys changed their names when converted. In many cases, it was impossible to track their origin. Today, we are unsure about the ethnicity of Grand Viziers. One person can be claimed by several Balkan nations. Rustem Pasha was Grand Vizier during reign of Suleiman the Magnificent. Rustem even married Sultan's daughter, Mihrimah. Some sources say Rustem was ethnic Serb, while others say he was Croat. Why is this important? In 1557, Serbian Church was renewed while Rustem was Grand Vizier. Rustem, being Serb or Croat, puts different light on the event. If Rustem was Serb, then he had personal interest in renewing Serbian Church. Turkish historians try to justify Devshirme. Due to the lack of sources, we cannot properly analyze Devshirme. Turkish historians mention how Christian families were happy to give away their children. We know of a case of a young man who was at the monastery preparing to become a monk. He was kidnapped by Turks and became Devshirme recruit. Some say that only boys from important families were taken. This doesn't seem plausible since there weren't that many important families. In case of Mehmed Pasha Sokolovic, his family converted to Islam and joined him. One may claim that Devshirme didn't tear families apart. But in most cases, families never learned what happened to their child. They wouldn't be informed if he had died. How did Turks feel about Devshirme? Some Turkish scholars believed Devshirme was against Islamic law. Islamic law is against forced conversions. Turkish historians like to brag how Ottoman Empire respected other faiths. Ottomans did not forcibly convert people to Islam. Devshirme was the only exception to the rule. I have to point out that Christians in Ottoman Empire had to pay special yearly tax for being Christians. Converting Christians would mean losing taxpayers. It wasn't about religious freedoms, it was all about the money. How do modern Serbs feel about Devshirme? You will not find Serbs who think positively about Devshirme. It's one of the few things we all agree about. Some Serb far-right nationalists believe modern Turks all have Serb blood due to Devshirme. I have to point out that kids were taken from other Balkan nations too. There is no evidence that Serbs were more targeted than others. In 1945, Ivo Andrić published the book The Bridge on Drina. He later won Nobel Prize in Literature. The bridge was built by Grand Vizier Mehmed Pasha Sokolovic. The book states he built the bridge on the spot where he was taken from his mother. In the first chapter, it is described how his mother ran after Turks who took her son. Only the lack of bridge prevented her from further running. Decades later, her son built the bridge. The story is based on true events, but dramatized by Andrić. In 1981, famous Serb singer Brad Cune Gojković recorded a song called Janičar, Turkish Janissary. The lyrics describe Janissary who is burning the village where he was born. He almost kills his mother. In the last moment, she recognized him as her son due to the birthmark. Of course, book from 1945 and song from 1981 cannot be used as historical sources, but they show how people feel about Devshirme. What do I think about Devshirme? I see no valid reason for the existence of Devshirme. Ottoman Empire had many poor Muslims who would gladly join the army. I think Devshirme was a cruel way to impose supremacy. It was the way to save ethnic Turks from dying in wars. There are still people who believe children should be taken from unfit parents. They justify this by claiming birth parents were poor or uneducated. I believe kids should be taken only in cases of abuse and grave negligence. Devshirme doesn't sound like a better life. Very few Devshirme recruits had good and long lives.